You're listening to the new WCEG Network on WCEG Talk Radio.com. Please click the live stream tab or watch us live on your smart TV. YouTube at WCEG Network. I'm Dr. Wanzo, your show host of Mind Matters for the next hour. We are the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG Network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show host and guest and not WCEG Network. Thank you for your continued support. Good evening again, and welcome to Mind Matters, where we discuss relevant mental health issues. I'm your host, Dr. Cassandra Wanzo. I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been practicing in Atlanta for 30 years. Our co-host this evening is Miss Shavett Athouris. She is a registered nurse for over 20 years and a former nursing professor. She has volunteered thousands of community hours at homeless shelters to enrich the lives of homeless men, women, and children. She is the CEO of Pyramia, which are all natural products that provide a safe alternative to alcohol-based sanitizers. She is the administrative director for a nonprofit where they help develop and mentor youth. You can visit the website at www.theosmovement.org. Welcome, Shavett.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Our very special guest this evening is Mr. Jacques Hall. Did I pronounce your name right? Is it Jacques?
You did.
Okay, good. Mr. Hall is a top producing licensed realtor. He has been a part of the $1 Million Club in real estate sales while overseeing major investment projects through his companies. He has endeavored to both serve his community and excel as an entrepreneur. He is the summer camp director for a Christian camping organization and co-leads a mentoring group focusing on educating children on financial literacy. I think that's awesome. He is passionate about helping young African-American youth find their path in life. He serves as the chairman of the board of directors for Restore Life, is that the correct pronunciation? An organization that serves families in urban settings. He shares his time and treasures to help build productive young citizens throughout the Atlanta area. He has a loving wife and 3 beautiful daughters. Welcome, Mr. Hall.
Thank you.
This will be our last show until the fall. As you may recall, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We wanted to focus this show on the life of a bright young man, Nikolas. Mr. Hall is Nikolas's father. On Saturday, April 16th, 2022, 20-year-old Nikolas was shot and killed by APD at the BP gas station on Cascade Road after an incident where the gas station clerk was stabbed. Nikolas had been suffering with mental illness. It was the day before his 21st birthday. So, Mr. Hall, what were some of the early signs that you noticed with Nico?
So I became Nikolas's bonus father when he was about 12 years old. Okay. Obviously, you know, as you read in my bio, I spent a lot of time in the community working with youth. And when I met Nikolas, I met him on the basketball court at the church that we were attending at the time. Super bright, loving, passionate, very smart young man. Through he and I's relationship sparked a relationship with his mother, and then we got married. So just a little bit of backstory. But I've always just kind of been, you know, someone, especially while mentoring, you know, young folks, just kind of, you know, watching sort of their social behaviors and things like that. And so just to answer your question, one of the early warning signs that I, you know, recall a light bulb just kind of going off, just kind of saying, man, there's something that may not be completely right here. And, you know, you don't want to be super hypercritical of young folks because they are still developing. So social skills are a big deal for me. And so I would just kind of recognize that every now and again, when we get kind of, you know, people may come over or, you know, we get in social crowds, you know, he would kind of do things that I would kind of consider a little bit socially awkward. Like he hadn't been around people, but he's very well acquainted with folks all the time. You know, could hold a conversation with an adult, but there would just be like little social things that was just kind of like, that was a little weird. You know, why did he kind of do that? You know, and so that was just kind of like one of the first things that I kind of picked up on in the journey of, you know, being his father.
Okay. About how old was he when you were noticing that?
Probably about 15, 14, maybe 14, 15.
Okay.
Yeah, there was some, you know, some oppositional, you know, defiance deals there, more specifically with women. But, you know, I just kind of attributed it to him being raised by a single mom at the time, you know, maybe kind of his defiance against women. But there was some strong oppositional deals that I kind of picked up on early on.
But you usually find like during adolescence when they're trying to exert their own identities.
Correct.
So when was the first time that he had any contact with the mental health system?
So I want to say it was maybe the end of 2019. No, it was actually in 2020 because when he first had his first contact with a mental health institution, he actually contracted COVID. So it had to be in 2020. Somewhere in the beginning of 2020 was his first encounter with Anchor Hospital.
So what led to that encounter?
So probably about the October before that, you know, I got a call from Nikolas's roommates at the time that he kind of just was behaving oddly, you know, kind of saying things like he's the next Messiah, he's a modern day Noah, you know, just some very strange behaviors, kind of, you know, staying in isolation for a very long period of time, not eating, doing things like that. And so that led to him actually spending almost like a day out, you know, kind of like in the street. And then that was what sparked him to be admitted to a mental health institution.
So was he admitted on his own or was it voluntary, or how did he end up being admitted?
Man, I can't remember. I think he went to a hospital, maybe Southern Regional. And I think they ended up 1013ing him. Okay.
So for the audience, 1013 is an involuntary admission where a doctor or police officer can admit someone for 72 hours for observation and treatment when they themselves are not willing to sign involuntary. So it's an involuntary type of admission.
Yeah, and I think it was a police officer because he's, like I said, he spent the day on the street and then he ended up at Southern Regional and then he ended up over at Anchor.
So what you're describing are kind of what we call grandiose symptoms with, you know, thinking you're someone else or whatever, which we find like in things like bipolar or schizoaffective bipolar type. What did they tell you at the time was his diagnosis?
That was exactly what they told us. It was a schizoaffective. Yeah, I was like, is that like schizophrenia? I didn't really know the pronunciation of the word, but anyway, that was what they told us initially. And then through some counseling, treatments, and all that stuff, as he kind of matriculated through, the mental health institution at Anchor, that's kind of where things kind of turned into a bipolar disorder diagnosis.
Okay. So over the course of his life, about how many times would you say he was hospitalized?
So this again started in 2020. So we're in 2022. We haven't had any hospitalizations in 2022 because he just kind of was over hospitalization. So Anchor, Pennsylvania, two in Tennessee, another one here, maybe 6 or 7 times. And then Ridgeview. So yeah, 6 or 7 times.
And can you share with the audience like how much you personally spent on the hospitalizations?
Yeah. So over the course of a year and a half or 2, my wife and I probably spent out of pocket between, deposits on the admissions to like the Ridgeviews was like $6,000, but about $38,000 because every one of them required an upfront payment and a percentage of, even when you meet your deductible, a stronger percentage had to have been paid up front. And then we had to pay out of pocket for him to stay in what they kind of consider like transition homes. But they kind of remind me more like a group home setting for people with mental health illnesses. Maybe they get Social Security or something like that. But we were paying out of pocket about $600 to $800 a month for him to kind of have a room in these different facilities or houses.
38,000. That is just
Wow.
Yep.
So was there any insurance involved, or that's even with insurance? It was 30.
Yeah, that was with insurance. There was maybe a 6-month period that he had no insurance. And so there was, kind of like the ranch in Pennsylvania. I think we had to pay that out of pocket completely. And it was like $12,000. But yeah.
Shavett, feel free to.
Yeah. I just, that's a lot. Even to know that you had insurance, a lot to pay out of pocket, but wow, it's just unfortunate that you had to spend that much out of pocket.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it was from one thing to the next because there's no insurance for you don't use insurance at all for those houses. Typically they intake people who have Social Security, so that covers their room and board. So you're paying that plus grocery plus
right,
the whole nine. So because there's no working, he wasn't working, he couldn't hold down the job. So
right, and it just kept adding up.
Because I know in terms of the experience with personal care homes that we have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about that, Shavett, with the personal care homes?
Well, several of our patients, I work directly hand in hand with Dr. Wanzo, and some of our personal care homes have a live-in where someone's there at the facility to ensure that, the patients there take their medications every day. They just kind of oversee them. Some are more strict than others. Some say, hey, you have to get permission to walk down the street to the corner store. Others, they go freely and come back at their own will. So, different ones have different rules, but overall, it was just a safer place for them to go and be, and especially, being able to have a little bit more control over their medications, in which typically a lot of patients, like the number one problem is with non-compliance, meaning that they don't really take their medications because oftentimes they don't feel that they need it.
Absolutely. And that was one of the biggest struggles in this time because, I think there was a time when he was hospitalized that they offered us like a shot or something. Or maybe, no, I don't even know if they offered us a shot. They said that it was something that we could, consider using or, kind of talking to him about doing. But I mean, he was I wouldn't say completely, he was compliant for maybe a month. And then he was non-compliant for a few months, because the medicine, he just said it just didn't make him feel like himself. It didn't make him feel good. It was, one thing from the next. Then, he suffered with like stomach issues from taking the medication. And so he just didn't want to do it. But there was also a psychological positioning in his mind that, he didn't need the medicine. He was telling us we were crazy. There's nothing wrong with me, and then he's like, no, I do recognize something's wrong. So I should take the medicine. But then it was like, no, I'm doing all this research. That was like when it really, really got bad, or before he was diagnosed, it was research. I mean, he was in books so hard. He was on Google searching for things. Like it was almost like he was obsessed with trying to find information on just anything. He just wanted to be what he would call enlightened.
Did you say he was very bright? So that, he was very bright.
Yep, very much so. I mean, literally a 3.8 student. He was very smart, very smart. And so, to the medicine, then he would say, well, no, I can, I found out that I can, drink this tea or, take this supplement or, do this exercise or whatever it is. It was just one thing from the next, and it was just like complete non-compliance. And, and then if things got really, really bad, then he kind of just say, okay, well, maybe I should take the medicine. But then he'd take it for a couple of weeks and stop.
That's one of the biggest issues. And when it's an initial diagnosis, it's hard for them to understand that they may have certain symptoms because it takes about a good 60 days, sometimes 90 days of taking it consistently in order for it to really be in their system and for them to not experience as many side effects from it. So it's hard for them to hang in there with the side effects as their body adjusts, because a lot of the medications, it will alter or work on the chemical imbalance within the brain. And so it's hard for them to work through those symptoms, knowing that they may have, I don't know what symptoms he had, but I've seen patients have drooling, their eyes, they may have a drooping eye or just, not feeling themselves, and they don't like that feeling. When we tell them to hang in there, your body's adjusting and getting used to it, but it's very difficult sometimes for them to get used to it and hang in there.
Yeah. But because of the non-compliance and non-adherence, that's why in the majority of the people in our clinics, majority of them are on what we call a long-acting injectable. Some of them will last 30 days, some will last 90 days, and just recently they came out with an injectable that lasts 6 months. So we do have medicines available now that will last for 6 months, which means it's easier for them not to have to try to remember to take the meds or whatever. So we find that very helpful in our population because it does help to stabilize them and keep them out of the hospital, the long-acting injectables. Yeah. Yes,
it does. It does. And you said that he was or was not on an injectable form of medication?
He was not.
Okay.
So you mentioned one of the symptoms he had was the grandiose feelings. Any other kinds of symptoms that he exhibited during his episodes?
So, yeah, I mean, that was definitely like one of the deal about, kind of just that grandiose thing, like, believing that he was like, becoming like Buddha or like a modern day Messiah or, that kind of stuff. But yeah, those were probably like the most extreme grandiose deals.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
Any depressive symptoms? Did he ever have any depressive symptoms?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was this very like seclusive times, in and out, and just kind of not really knowing like what he was thinking, where he was, not physically necessarily, just kind of be off in his room, and then maybe like out of nowhere, a burst of energy, he's gonna go hang out with some friends or something,
So that's again like when they say bipolar, you have the highs, that's the manic phase, and then the lows of the depressive phase. So it's two poles between the high phases and the low phases. So that's what bipolar is. Yeah. Had he exhibited any history of any type of violent behavior?
No, he never was violent, never, aggressive or any of those things.
Okay. So when he did take his meds, did he seem to be more stable than those periods?
I would say more, Stable is a hard word to describe to. I would just say he was much more tolerable to life in general. He'd be willing to do things. He'd be more compliant. Not that he was like non-compliant in a bad way, but it was just like, okay, I can actually get up and go to work, or I can sit here and have a conversation. He, part of his disorder was just like very, very long delays. You'd say, hey, Nico, how's your day? And he just kind of, and Nico, how was your day, son? And just kind of, it was okay. Just not very responsive. So it was just, when he took his medicine, he'd be much more present.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as the medicine, did he take them on his own, or did you give them to him, or did he take them on his own?
He would take them on his own. There was some times that it have to be like a reminder and and all that kind of stuff. But generally, when he took them, he would do it on his own.
So with a lot of our patients, that's why we do the injectables. Or sometimes people will have to observe them, because sometimes with some of our patients, they'll put it under their cheek to pretend or under their tongue to pretend like they took it, but they didn't actually. Then the family members will find the pills under the bed or someplace else. But that's a really, really big problem is taking the meds, adherence to the meds. That's a big problem.
Yeah, we'd often have to ask them to literally hold their tongue up and, look into their cheeks and under their tongue just to see if they were hiding it there. And you'd be, we were surprised that, when the patients did that.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. How difficult was it, Jacques, for you and your wife, your family, to live with him? Was it difficult to live with him, someone that has a mental illness?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just being very transparent, I kind of reached a place where I just couldn't do it anymore. Which was why I was willing to, pay for the in-home, well, not really in-home care, but those facilities where we have to pay $600-700 a month for them to have a place, because, I've got 3 small children. So because it was something that was so new and you didn't really understand kind of where he was mentally and, what side of the pendulum he was going to be on today, it seemed so risky for me. But then also being a man, you're like, man, look, you got to work, you got to figure life out too. Even though we're dealing with this, we still have to move forward in life. And so, it was very difficult because, one, it's your child, you want to see them do well, you want to love them. But then they're just so distant. So then you're just kind of I'm just funding for, a full grown adult sitting here, not really functioning. So it was quite a difficult task.
Yeah. And likewise, I too have had to live with someone with mental illness. Years ago, one of our sons, came home and was just, like you said, sometimes you would say, wow, that's strange, or that was bizarre. And then, a lot of times as parents, we may overlook those type things. I know for us, sometimes we saw it, but we were like, maybe it was just, I didn't really see what you saw. You know what I mean? But the more as time went on, it was very difficult because he actually, this particular son, got to the point I started missing all of my knives in the kitchen. And I cleaning up the basement one day and lifted the cushions and they were all there. And I asked him, I said, why are all the knives here? And he said, I'm fighting them off. And I said, fighting who off? Them, well, who is them? And, they come at night and they come for me and I have to, and so I have to use them to swing at them. And, so it really, as time progressed, he just got a little bit more and more severe. So I do understand, when you say it's difficult to live with them, it's very difficult, especially when you have younger children. And at the time, we had younger boys.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned employment. So was he able to hold down employment?
For periods of time, not like super long.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Do you know anything about his biological father? Someone wants to know, was there any mental health history in his biological father? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I actually don't know him. I mean, I've met him when we had our son's funeral.
Okay. Because typically with bipolar, with schizophrenia, with major depression, there is a genetic component. It is something that does run in families. So
yes,
a genetic component, yes.
It's definitely oftentimes hereditary. Yes.
So, Mr. Hall, what would you like to see change in our system as it relates to mental illness? What changes would you like to see?
I mean, I guess just kind of having, endured the journey. I mean, one of the things that seems to be something that may need to be a societal change is just how the healthcare industry or the insurance industry views mental health, especially from a financial perspective. I don't know that most people could just, pitch $38,000 in a year and a half at someone's, mental health. And so it just kind of seems like one of those deals where our society needs to kind of wake up and realize like this is, a pandemic. I'm even now after going through this with my son, I'm seeing that there's a lot of these traits out there in a lot of young folks. And so, I've got family members that, I'm even kind of like, well, wow, maybe, I think older people used to be like, man, they just lost their mind. I think that was just a phraseology when the reality is a lot of people were dealing with some, bipolar, schizophrenia, mental health issues. And so, so widespread, it seems that, one of the things that we could be made more aware of is the fact that the insurance industries don't really have a whole lot of money pitched at mental health.
You're absolutely right. There is a discrimination when it comes to so-called medical services, but mental health, and I know different agencies, and in fact, I know Georgia's trying to pass a mental health parity act because there is discrimination when it comes to insurance companies with treating mental illness. There definitely is discrimination. So that is something that the government obviously needs to make sure that that is not the case.
And then one of the, for me as well, one of the breakdowns in the system is, what happens when a family aren't as fortunate as he was for them to be able to afford for him to stay somewhere else. That's like a big issue. And it's what I was told is there's a big break in the system because, for families who can't afford, $700 or $800 a month for them to stay somewhere else in a personal care home. And that's a good price. A lot of times it's more expensive than that. Oftentimes that's, and if families say, hey, I can't deal with it anymore, this is too hard, you gotta go. And a lot of times they leave and there's nowhere for them to go because of the system. Now, years ago, back in the day, we all remember where someone had mental illness and there was a facility that they could really go to and be housed. Not a problem because they have a mental illness and this is like a set place that they could go. And then once they decided to do away with those facilities, they just ended up on the streets. A lot of times they're in homeless shelters. A lot of our patients, believe it or not, sleep in tents under the bridges in Atlanta. As a nurse, I have to go out, giving injections and, you have to have an address for someone. And oftentimes I know, okay, I have to go look behind Family Dollar at this address. It's like no real address. And when you're talking about just, meeting somebody under a tree at a certain day and time, I mean, oftentimes I literally would have to just drive the streets of Atlanta, and hope and pray I see the patient I'm looking for. And when I spot them, I could roll down my window and say, hey, come on, let's go, and I just pull over and give an injection right there on the street. But it's sad because sometimes they don't have a place. Now, fortunately, where we work, one of the things that we do is we do help people find housing. But it's sad that when people are accustomed to their way of living, we've had patients who we put them in a home, an apartment, and they would leave and go back to sleep behind Family Dollar. Why? Because of it's the norm. It's what they're used to. It's what they're accustomed to. It's what's feel familiar to them. And so I'm just so grateful. I know that he was as well, that you all were able to afford that. But the downside with the system, so to speak, is when there's thousands and thousands of families who can't afford that, and their loved ones, when they can't deal with them anymore, but because it becomes a hazard, a safety hazard a lot of times, there's nowhere for them to go, and they end up on the streets.
Or unfortunately, what the biggest housing place for people now with mental illness is the jail system. They end up in the jail system. It's so inappropriate. They don't need to be in jail. They need to be in a facility where they can get treatment, but they're in the jails. They're in the jails.
Yeah. And some of ours, when they get out of jail, they'll stay out just for a short time because they say it's easier in their minds. It's easier to be in jail where they have a bed, they have food, they have shelter, you know, and a lot of times they'll do things to go right back in because now they're just so accustomed to the jail and having a place to live versus living on the street in the hot or the cold of the winter.
So it was during the 1960s when a process called deinstitutionalization occurred, and that's where they emptied all the long-term mental health facilities and just basically put everybody on the streets. And there was supposed to be, you know, a lot of facilities to follow up care, but unfortunately, I mean, to some extent there was, but it was never enough to accommodate the amount of people that were discharged from the facilities. So the government really needs to do more in terms of providing housing, shelter, you know, for people with mental illness, because so many of our patients, like even now, they'll require hospitalization and the hospitals will admit them for 2 to 3 days and discharge them back, and they're not stable. Like for instance, Georgia Regional is a facility here that would provide long-term care, but whatever is going on with Georgia Regional, they're not admitting people anymore for long-term care, but many of our patients need long-term care. 2 or 3 days is not enough for treatment. And they need, you know, like I said, shelter and food, but those things are not available. And medication, oftentimes they don't have any way to get the medications that they need. So more needs, there's so much and so many needs that need to be done for our people who are suffering with mental illness, as far as housing, shelter, medication. I mean, it's really a sad situation. The system is really broken. It's really broken.
And then too, you know, when you're talking about, you know, the system being broken, oftentimes with the patients, we talk about the jail, we talk about the facilities that used to be in the 60s when they deinstitutionalized, you know, the facilities and mental health, and they didn't have anywhere to go. But even now, today, we only hope and pray that we can have a system that will allow our patients to be, you know, have somewhere to go. I don't know how far-fetched that is. You know, I always laugh and say, well, one day if I become rich, I will, we can build some facilities around this world. But it's a real issue. It's a real big issue.
Yeah. And I just wonder, like, even, you know, as you say that, like, if I had enough money, I would just open up facilities for these people. And I'm just like, man, there's so many people with these issues that need accommodations that, you know, and we live in a country where it almost seems like that shouldn't be an issue, right?
Right.
How many billion did we send to Ukraine? How many billions?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, seriously. I mean, all that money that billions, what was it, 30-something billion dollars? I mean, seriously, what about at home? Take care of home.
Yeah. We often say that, you know. That would be great to even send them 29 billion and devote 1 billion to you know, mental illness or homelessness or so many things that we could say that it could be used for, but just taking care of right here in the US, right here at home. Absolutely.
Someone asked if the jail or prison provides mental health care. Yes, they do. I worked maybe 8 years in the system. At one facility, I was director of the chief psychiatrist, and we had a specific floor that was dedicated to mental health. So everybody on the floor had mental health issues, and it was the only floor in the jail that had single cells so that the people, could be alone because they couldn't really, function with mental health issues if they had, cellmates with their own issues. So we did have a mental health floor. I was the chief psychiatrist. We did provide medications for them, and we did have therapists on staff who provided medication for them. So yes, we did. But the issue with working in the jail is, there would be like newer meds, but because of the budget, they wanted to go with the older meds that tended to have more side effects. And it was just really difficult pulling teeth to get them on the newer types of meds. So that was a constant battle. You had to submit paperwork to try to get approval to get the newer meds that were more effective. You're always battling that. But yes, we did have mental health services. And as I said, the jails are still the biggest provider of mental health services currently. It shouldn't be that way, but that's a fact. They are the largest provider of mental health services currently. And who's mainly there? Just us. That was also very, just depressing to see the majority of the people there, being people of color. That was very depressing.
And then just like those patients that are not in jail and they deal with the non-compliance and not taking their meds, in jails, we have that same issue where you have the non-compliance, and a lot of times they don't want to take their medication, although they have it readily available for them in the jails. They still have that issue of non-compliance. And
you had mentioned, seeing this a lot, there is a crisis in mental health when it comes to young people, among teens. There's a mental health crisis with teen and adolescent suicide soaring. Is a big crisis that really needs to be addressed in this country.
Yes, it does. It does. And that's, we've done several shows to where we tell parents, and if you're listening out there, the best thing that you can do is really what Jacques is doing, kind of paying attention to what they say, paying attention to what they do, even look into their eyes. And you can just tell a lot with their demeanor when you know your children. So, don't be afraid to ask them those tough questions. Jacques, I like the way you really were into him, where you would ask him, how are you feeling? How was school? See how they answer. And, you may have moments, just like he and I had, where you say, well, that was strange and that was weird. And you kind of start keeping note of that. But don't ignore your children. Really try to pay attention to them and ask them, how was your day? How are you feeling? Do you have friends at school? Just different questions that you can ask them, that so as a parent, you start seeing those signs. Because with mental health in our children, it starts around age 17 or 18 to where they may start showing those signs about 17 or 18 to age 24. So don't think that it's something that, because my child is 12, I haven't seen it yet, so I won't see it. You probably won't see it, because with mental health, it typically will start full-fledged, where you'll start noticing it around age 17 or 18, and it can go all the way up to age 24.
And that's when we really did start seeing it, the most prominent deals, because now that I kind of recall, I remember saying to my wife, I'm like, this boy is staying up all night. He could stay up till 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning and get up 6 o'clock and get to school. He'd be tired, but it was just like every night, it was just kind of like, why is he not sleeping? And so he would stay up and he could play video games all night long. He'd just kind of sit there all night long, and just all night long would stay up.
So what you're describing is more symptoms of the manic phase, the mania, not sleeping, full of energy, the grandiosity. All of that is the manic phase. What about in school? Were his grades affected at all?
That brother could go to school and perform.
Wow. Someone wanted to know what type of video games?
Fortnite, those shooting games.
I have no idea anything about video games, so I don't know what type of games those are.
Yeah. Yeah, they're shooting gangs for
Oh,
sure.
shooting guns. And all.
Guns.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about
Shooting actual guns.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Hall, is there anything you think that we could have done to help have a different ending?
You know, as a parent, you know, you kind of always get ready to go through the what ifs. And I'm a man of faith, you know, and my pastor came over when our son passed away. And, you know, one of the things that I've held on to in this time is just not telling myself a lie, right? It's easy to try and find a reason or a prescription or something to attribute to why. And if there's something that could have been different. And so I've been very careful not to let my mind wander like, man, what if we would have done this? Or what if we would have done that? You know, ultimately, I just believe that God is in control of all things. As hard as it is to accept this. But if I just had to really like think through it, to be totally honest, you know, shout out to my wife, because, you know, there were many days that this brother was done. And she kept at it, you know, and she kept at it. You know, I was, you know, willing to be a funding source, you know, through some of it, but I don't know that there would have necessarily been anything to do different outside of when I really thought about it, was like, if we would have pursued the injection, I feel like that could have been more advantageous for him, because at least the injection would have given him a lot more time of stability versus that 1 month or 3 weeks and a quit, you know? So, yeah, if there's something I could think to have done different, it would have truly been like, you know what, go with the injection.
Okay. And that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they do, it does make a big difference, you know, in their care when they get, you know, get that injection that will last, especially like we said earlier, when they don't take their medications. But also for me, as far as the system and what could be done differently, you know, I would just like to see, Dr. Wanzo, I know you and I deal so much with doctors at the hospitals. And like you said, Nico went to the hospital 6 or 7 times, you know, but the hospitals start calling those individuals, like saying, okay, they have frequent flyer miles, like they're coming to the hospital a lot. So when they go often, especially when they go to the same hospital, it's like they know that they're having a mental illness crisis or what have you, but they're discharged a lot, way too early, too soon. 2 days, 3 days. Okay, so if they were acting this way and it's 48 hours later, how are you saying that they're stable right now when you're discharging them? It doesn't make sense. But to us, we see that a lot, and it's becoming a big problem. And so much is that, you know, one of our patients that was discharged from the hospital said intentionally that he was in there cutting himself, mutilating himself, cutting his wrist to get attention. No one still paid attention to him, and they discharged him. Well, he went and stood out on a bridge in Atlanta, stood on a bridge and was about to jump. We're talking, we saw something going on. He went to the hospital. He wanted attention, so he started cutting his wrist and cutting himself. They just bandaged him up and didn't really address that, where those emotions were coming from. Discharged him literally a couple days. Went out, stood on the bridge, and it was a passenger in a vehicle that stopped their car, got out, and talked him down off the ledge. And a couple of other cars stopped. And so you had a couple of people on this bridge talking this kid down. Then he left and went to, after the bridge incident, went to a different hospital, and they let him go in 2 days.
Yeah. No insurance, right?
I can't remember if he had insurance or not. I don't recall.
So probably not. If whether they have insurance or not, the point is they needed care, and these, whatever the system, the doctors are very insensitive. And I do think that there's a racial bias, because we talk about African American patients, and these are doctors of the other persuasions. So I think that there definitely is a lot of bias when it comes to race and a lack of sensitivity. Like
Yes.
one institution, which I will not name, I sent someone there in the 1013 because this young man was having thoughts of wanting to kill himself. Do you know that they were discharging him? And I spoke with the doctor. I'm like, why? And do you know what this doctor had the nerve to say? Oh, well, he's not psychologically sophisticated enough to be depressed and suicidal. Black patient, white doctor. I mean, this goes back to years where they said Black people didn't have the mental capacity to be depressed. And this is like, you know, in this century, and someone is saying that about a Black patient, that he wasn't psychologically sophisticated enough to be depressed and suicidal. She actually said that.
Yeah.
I complained to the state about it, but yeah, I mean, it's just very frustrating. I get frustrated every day dealing with the hospitals. And we had another young man who is in denial, hallucinations, not taking meds, won't take meds. So in the hospitals have something where they can do paperwork and do force them to take meds, you know. And this guy, when he's on the injection, he does well, but he refused the injection. So the hospital, the doctor had the authority to do that. And I pleaded and begged, you know, with the doctor, and he wouldn't do the forced meds. The patient was discharged, back in the hospital again, discharged, you know, to the point, like now he's being evicted from his apartment because he's done all kind of things to his neighbors. But sometimes they just won't listen to you. The hospital physicians, these white female physicians, they just, when it comes, I think, to our Black patients, they're very insensitive. And I have to say it, I've seen that, very insensitive.
Well, I will say that one of the hardest times was when he went back to a hospital, and you know, and they were going to release him in like 2 or 3 days, and we were just look, like we can't, you know, they were like, you know, you guys have to come sign him out, and they were sending him back to our care. He was probably about, I think he may have been 18 at that time. And I was just like, or maybe 19, I can't remember, but whatever it was. And we were just like, no, he's not ready. He's been there 2 or 3 days, you know, essentially, like, I think at this time he would have been like walking around outside with no clothes on. And the social worker, maybe, I think, said that the doctor said that their job is to stabilize them and then, like, you know, release them. And like, if we wanted more treatment, we should, you know, seek outpatient treatment. And we're just like, well, you're just saying send him back home, send him back to us. And he's been there for 2 or 3 days. You guys have psychiatrists and therapists there. He didn't even have a complete diagnosis at the time, because this was early on. Like there was just the schizoaffective. There was no bipolar. They didn't diagnose him with bipolar. They said that he might have been suffering from some depression. But we were trying to get them to really work through what was going on at the time. And then you said something about that old medication. We had a doctor friend who was very, very, very vocal to us, saying, do not let them give him, I think it's a first generation medicine.
Yes, the first generation medicine. Those were the older ones with all the long-term side effects.
Yeah, I can't think of
people walking around like zombies and things like that.
Yeah.
That's old first generation. That's exactly what it is.
Housal, I think of what it is.
That's the first generation antipsychotic, the older ones, the first one.
And she was like, do not let them give him that. So we were calling, like, don't give him that medicine. But they were adamant, like, this is what we give everybody when they come in here. And we were like, no, you know, give them some Abilify or something like that.
Exactly.
You know, she was acquainted with that. She actually is a doctor that, you know, dealt with mental health, you know, for a long time, and she still does. But yeah, I mean, so we had an advocate, and that was a beautiful thing of this process. We had a beautiful advocate and a friend of ours who helped us advocate for our son in that process. And so, you know, she was like, you know, that medicine will make him get twitches in his eyes, and you know, so
it's what we call tardive dyskinesia. It's a long-term, permanent, irreversible side effect they can get where they have involuntary movements of their body. And tardive dyskinesia, it's long-term and it's irreversible. So nothing you can do once they exhibit.
And that's the thing, like you say, continuing to talk about the breaks in the system, you know, as parents, you all could advocate for him.
Correct.
But a lot of our patients, and even patients that we see, believe it or not, don't really have family members. They don't have any family that they even know where they're located or where they are. So they only have us to lean on to be advocates for them. So we're so fortunate that he was able to have you all as parents to advocate for him. But again, you experienced it, and we experience it all the time, to where they're discharged just way too early, 2 days, 3 tops, and they're right back.
That's not enough to stabilize anyone. That is not enough time. You can't stabilize somebody. That's not enough time.
Yeah, but when we paid and when we had insurance,
see, now that's
Oh, we had a month. You
know what? Let me tell you, because that's one reason I used to do inpatient in private hospitals. I'd say, okay, so and so, we have a meeting every morning to talk about who we're going to discharge. So I said, okay, I'm discharging so and so. The hospital said, oh no, you're not. The only reason, because the person, they said they still have so many days of insurance left, and they would demand that person stay until they exhausted their insurance. Oh, that happens every day in these private hospitals. Yes, for profit. That's another thing, the for profit aspect. That's why I left during inpatient. They would demand that I keep the person, even though they've been up there a month and they're stabilized, saying, oh, they still have 2 days of insurance left.
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't even think it should be legal for that to even occur.
But it does happen.
It happens all the time. So that means if they run out of hospitalizations for that, within that 12-month period, I guess before it starts over, then they get sick or they need to go to the hospital. Now they don't have any more days. Like that doesn't even make sense.
Yep.
The system
makes no sense.
The system is broken.
It's very broken. Very broken.
Yeah. So, Mr. Hall, I wanted to ask, how are you, his mother, and his siblings dealing with Nico's death? How are y'all dealing with that?
Like I said, we're a family of faith. And so we've got a strong community. I've got to tell you, since the day our son passed away, I mean, even up until today, we've got a friend from Tennessee who literally just, took her entire break, and she's been staying here with us all week, helping us with laundry, helping with the kids. And, our house has truly been overrun and flooded with love and support. We actually, this will sound crazy, right before our son passed away, my 4-year-old says, Daddy, sometimes God lets your children die before you. This was the Wednesday.
Wow,
the Wednesday before the Saturday he passed away. And so, I said, to my wife, I said, Lord, maybe it's time for us to seek some life insurance. And the day that we were actually getting the life insurance done, that day, he had already passed away that morning.
Wow.
But I say that to say, I was talking about support. I mean, we've had friends that have just, flooded us with love, finances, the whole nine to help, memorialize him well. So in our community of faith, our church, shout out Gospel Hope, like they have shown the most amazing love towards us in this time. And they call us every day and they check on us, and we do things, and we're just overrun with love and support. So I think that's how we're able to keep some hope and some focus on life.
So how old are your other children? You said 4, and how old are the other 2?
So the 4-year-old turned 5. Actually, she and Nico were supposed to share a birthday, but Nico kept saying, I want to have my own birthday. And so she came 3 days after his birthday. So she just turned 5. A few weeks ago, right after he passed away. And then my 1-year-old will be 2 tomorrow. And then my 3-year-old, I have a 3-year-old who will be 4 in August.
Okay.
Yeah. He has 3 beautiful daughters.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 little girls.
Mm-hmm.
So how are they coping? The young girls, how are they?
Now the 5-year-old, she was very, very, and still is very, very devastated by the loss of her. I mean, she and Nico were like this. I mean, that was his boo.
Wow.
Okay, and he was her boo. They were inseparable. I mean, oh my gosh, it's kind of crazy. Like the love that they share, a baby to a much older brother. was, I mean, it was a beautiful thing. He would just lay with that baby and she would just lay on him, and they just, I mean, oh my God. Like, there's so many pictures with them together. It's, you know, it's memories that'll last a lifetime. But she is, she's sad. When we finally told her, you know, a week or so after he passed away, like a week and a half after he passed away, you know, I mean, she lost it. She broke down, she cried. But she said, well, Daddy, but if Nico's in heaven one day, we're going to go to heaven. So we're going to see Nico.
Wow. Okay.
But, you know, she's very sad. She went to school and, you know, we checked in the next day of school after she found out. And she said to the lady checking the kids in at school, she said, you know, my brother passed away and he passed away before my birthday, but my daddy told other people before he told me. And so she was so upset. But, you know, she is, she's a strong girl. The other two, the middle child, you know, when we broke the news to all three of them, she said, my brother died, Niko died. And then she just kind of went on about her business, but she knows, you know, she says Niko's in heaven with great grandma and great granddaddy, and, you know, they're sweet, sweet girls, you know, so they're coping.
So did they all attend the funeral?
No, you know, the 1-year-old and the 3-year-old kind of was disconnected from this whole thing a little bit. But my 5-year-old, you know, we went to the funeral home. She said she wanted to go to the funeral home. And when we got to the funeral home, she said, Daddy, I don't want to see my brother like that, you know. And so she said, can you go take a picture and let me just look at the picture? And so we let her see the picture and we said, sweetie, do you want to go in and see him? She said, no, I don't want to see him in a casket. And so, you know, and then she said, no, I don't want to go to the funeral either. And so we didn't force her to go, you know, let that be her choice.
Okay.
That was great. Yeah. Just allow her to, you know, be her and deal with it in her own way, you know.
Yeah. And she has. I mean, she gets his obituary and she'll start turning pages when people come over and telling them about her brother and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But she's a very, very sharp, smart, passionate little lady.
Wow.
Yeah. So what would you like, Mr. Hall, the world to know about Niko? What would you like them to know?
Yeah. So when I think about Niko, and it's kind of crazy. I don't know if I have it here. Oh, yeah, here it is. So last night, you know, I'm in the basement. We're getting the basement finished. And I started finding some old papers that were in a drawer because we're finishing off 2 bathrooms in the basement. And I started looking through it and I found this letter that Niko had written as a 12 or 13-year-old boy. And I mean, literally in the letter, you know, it's just saying, you know, when I learn how to deal with my emotions, I'll treat people better and I'll have more respect for my mom and women.
Wow.
He was always the kid that wanted to correct himself. He didn't want to just, you know, be a kid that was just going off the tangent. You know, if something was wrong, he wanted it to be right. You know, he wanted to love well. You know, he definitely loved his siblings. Okay. He was passionate about basketball. I mean, when I tell you, that's how I met him, on a basketball court, and he swore he could beat me. And at some point, I guess he could. But I mean, he was passionate about basketball, passionate about, you know, friendship and all of that kind of stuff. And so Niko had a great love. You know, I tell people this all the time, even before he passed away. Mental health has been worse than cancer in my life, because at least with cancer, I knew that someone had something physiologically going on that they couldn't control. Mental health took away who Niko was. And so if I have to, you know, just kind of sum it up for the world to know, you know, Niko was a very loving, passionate, you know, happy young man who loved the Lord, and he loved his family, especially his siblings. He didn't like us that much sometimes, but that is what it is. But just a very passionate, very loving, you know, thoughtful young man.
Yeah, well, I know this is tough, being that it was just a few weeks ago, but we definitely want to thank you so much for being willing in such a short time of his passing to share, you know, in front of the world, you know, who he was, and, you know, just share with us Niko. So thank you so much for even being willing to do that.
And if I could, I just want to show you one thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I know the time is near. But this is Nikolas's memorial program.
Wow, beautiful.
Very, very,
Wow.
amazing young man who
Wow.
just loved his family, loved life. He was passionate
Wow.
about basketball.
Handsome young man.
Nice.
Yeah. And so this was my boy.
Wow.
Wow.
Love him. We'll always miss him,
Mhm.
and he is he was a gem to my heart,
Okay.
and we'll miss him.
You
Yeah.
have blessed us with your presence, and we do pray that your story will help someone, some other family
Yeah.
going through. And we thank you so much, and our prayers are with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm. All
We'll
right.
definitely continue to pray your strength.
Yes.
Thank you.